Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Retail Think Tank brainstorming session. I'm Alicia Esposito, Director of Content and New Media for Retail Touchpoints, and I'm thrilled to have joining me today Mayur Anadkat, VP of Marketing of Acquire. Mayur, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So for those of you who don't know, the Retail Think Tank is a new initiative for us. We know that the industry is brimming with so many resources and insights, and our goal is to, frankly, make it easier for you to navigate and consume the best of the best in retail content. Today's conversation is no exception because Mayur and Acquire are pros at all things customer experience. So a lot to get into, Mayur, but let's start at the top, the big trends that are happening right now. Obviously, the big macro trend that everyone has been watching and commentating on is retail's big shift to digital over the past year. Consumers were already relying more on online shopping channels, and we're doing it more over the past year. But we also saw some new consumers try e-commerce for the first time and realize how amazing and easy it is to do. So I want to ask you, how has this shift impacted retailers as a whole, but most of all, the customer service side of the equation, because that really plays a critical role in making it all come to life, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been a really interesting year and a half. I think that pushed forward a lot of trends. And I think those trends were really fast-tracked. They weren't like created anew. I think we can all relate to a lot of these trends because we're probably doing a few things that we would normally be doing. But it's been headed in that direction. And I think about retailers and those customer service teams, it really exposed a lot of the gaps that retailers have between their traditional customer service system and the way people actually interact online, on an app, on the go, or even in a store. If you think about it, like when you really see the cracks are when, buy online and purchase in store really started to take hold, because of some of the constraints we had. You can see how that's not a customer service function a lot of times. So really, I think this has been a trend for a while, but I think the expectation was that consumers would be very slow to adopt some of these things, and these were kicked as initiatives down the road. But everything's been fast tracked, so retailers have to really think about. I'd say the big macro trend is how to make things very consistent and conversational from the customer's perspective. Everything has been so far, obviously, sort of changing very fast. But you really have to figure out how to think from the customer's perspective and leverage a lot more employees beyond the customer service team to be part of that full service solution.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point because I know when the pandemic first hit, we saw a lot of research and analysis around how call center agents and customer service teams were feeling really strapped, right? Because all of that activity, all of that demand was shifting over to these channels. Whereas, typically the demand was a bit more level or a bit easier to manage. So, it's interesting that you say other members of the organization would have to play a role or a hand in bringing these service experiences to life. I do want to kind of double click on a point that you made around the gaps that a lot of retailers had and were forced to navigate. I mean, can we kind of dig into those a little bit more? Like, what kind of challenges were you hearing from the market? What were they really trying to pinpoint and drill into? And most of all, how to acquire like kind of manage those conversations and help position your customers for success during that time?
Yeah, no, I'd love to go deeper into that. I think when I think about it, what the gaps were essentially are it's very easy to sort of intuitively think of those experiences you uniquely started to do more of during the pandemic time. And when you think about yourself at home and how you want to interact, and then on a computer or tablet or your phone, and then how you are when you're on the go, and then how you are when you're kind of in that in between land where you kind of need something quickly, and you just need to check in or you just need a status. Those are things that, sort of unfortunately, they're not really set up in a lot of ways. They're not connected to each other. So, our entry into this was, many years ago, we focused on video, and then we started working on chat and chat bots. And we started to see these sort of trends, in 2016, 2018. There's some things that, there's just use cases where your customers are going to think differently, ask different questions differently, and a lot of these systems, ironically, are not connected to each other. So I think the big thing is mapping it out and making sure that there's a seamless transition between things is what's most important, and that's kind of I think one of the things that we focus on as we talk to some of our customers and we help them with their needs. For example, we have a furniture store owned by the Dufresne Group, is also owns Ashley Home Furnishings. Um, they shifted to a chat model for both sales and service, and to be able to escalate that into a video conversation is something that's just so intuitive when you're talking about furniture. But I think it's something that's relatively unique for a lot of companies who just thought about that for the first time during the pandemic. These kinds of moments, these just kind of like friction points where in some things you want to have a face to face, you want to see things. In other things, you just want an extension or an update, and text will be fine. But those things have to be connected. You can't start every conversation over again by explaining who you are and what you're calling about or what you need. And that's kind of what most systems are set up for today.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like customer service kind of breaks into like these two core buckets, I guess you could say. So to your point, I just need an update, or I just need some sort of resource, whether it be an article or some sort of hub where I can get the information I need around my order, or how to buy from you, just the fundamentals, right? And then there's the deeper, richer service opportunities. So that scenario with the video chat, right? And it's about creating that fluidity between the two of them, and ensuring that no matter which direction the consumer goes in, that there's that appropriate context, right? So the brand or the retailer can provide the best possible experience. And I'm wondering, as you share that example, and some of the other scenarios that we've seen really come to light, if you're kind of seeing the retail industry kind of veer in one direction or the other in terms of their priorities or their tech investments? Like, are you seeing more interest in like, let's automate, let's make this as efficient as possible for our team and for our consumers? Or are you seeing them say, no, we need richer digital tools and services to really maximize the revenue opportunities? Or is it, dependent upon the type of retailer it is? Because I could see that there's some nuance in making that decision.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of subsegments within retail that take it into very different directions. Kind of the higher touch examples versus kind of the more cost-based retailers. First of all, let me say I totally agree. There is these two very different pillars, as you put it. I think the problem is, it's sadly going to be the reason of what separates the winners from the losers is companies are still dragging their feet and thinking in terms of when they do implement automation and self-service, they think in terms of what's best for them. They think in terms of what's operationally more effective for them. They're not thinking in the customer's perspective. So once again, just like with the customer service teams, there's a lot of tools there, but they've not been implemented properly. You can have a very positive chatbot experience, but you're much more likely to have a very negative chatbot experience because they're not implemented properly. So it's sort of the history repeating itself. I'm old enough to remember phone automated systems where, they just really ended up after 20, 30 years of existence, just frustrating people. All people want to do is just avoid and go to agent. That behavior is what's being repeated to some degree, even with the new types of automation. So it's not really about, yes, it's of course things have to be digital. Of course you have to be everything has to be mobile first. Of course you have to extend to non-owned channels like social media. But if you're thinking in terms of how much you can automate, like the old phone systems and IVR systems were essentially a wall to deflect about 80% of the cost. If you're thinking in those terms, then you're probably going to get it wrong because you have to really think about what is a chatbot for and what is it not for. And the main thing, I'll go back to what I was saying earlier, the way it really works is when you make it conversational, meaning if I'm on a chatbot, I can easily switch to an agent. That's the main thing. I can easily continue the conversation. I don't have to repeat what I already wrote in the earlier parts of the chat. And so what I'm seeing is with regards to the way companies are going, I feel like the mega disruptors, the people that have really brought in new disruptive models like Amazon and some niche specific companies like Carvana, they're the ones that are going to win because they're thinking through that whole experience every step of the way from the customer's perspective. And unfortunately, some of the other sort of more established retailers are still digging their heels in and trying to be digital, be available on digital, but unfortunately will probably not be able to survive given they're kind of thinking about things in terms of savings and not experience.
Okay. So, like any good strategy, always put the customer at the center of the decision making process of the journey mapping, so to speak. Let's dig a little bit deeper into that process. So how retailers can develop a strategy, determine, not just what, tools and channels to use, but how to make those specific points of engagement as compelling and as easy as possible for the consumer. Because I love your point around the chatbots in particular, because you have to get into the frame of mind of the consumer, think through, okay, like what could they possibly want, what's their frame of mind, what questions are they going to be asking, and how do we route that to an outcome, whether it be a piece of content or an email link or a point of escalation. Like there are so many, like I'm thinking through just like one layer and I'm like, wow, this could go in a lot of different ways. So I mean, is there a typical process that you encourage retailers to go through as they think through their strategy? Do you have any pointers? Because I mean, there's the strategy and the journey mapping, but then there's all the different tools and tech that can go into it. So, I mean, how do they even wrap their heads around all of this?
Yeah, and it's actually related to your previous question as well. It kind of depends on what kind of retailer it is. And
Okay.
so, one thing retailers are really good at is understanding their audience. And it's ironic that when it comes to technology solutions that help them, they sort of take that sort of traditional view, and it's like this box approach again. But if you have to think about it like in terms of like what your store looks like or what your ad looks like or who it's reaching, you do a lot of the same analysis, right? You sit there and think about who's going to see this and how are they going to interact or engage with it. And that's the same thing with its technology, essentially. We've got, again, I think we, sort of sometimes over rotate on the idea that only like, millennials or Gen Z even are the ones that are going to be interested in social messaging or apps like Instagram or WhatsApp, when we know that's a huge part of the population that are on those platforms. And it's up to any good retailer at this stage to know that. I think they do from a promotional standpoint, but are they aware also from a service standpoint and from an engagement perspective, when someone is thinking about something, that can be a channel that they can reach out to you on. So I think brands have to go back to the basics, when it comes to figuring out who their customers are and how those customers want to engage with brands. That's kind of like the oversimplified version. I think there's a couple different things that I would say with regards to sort of some patterns and our approach. There is a typical journey that customers take. There is sort of this, as you put it, sort of two pillars to think about. There is kind of the, some amount of knowledge base and automation that you can really have great impact with, if it's done right. But then again, I go back to it has to be connected to your more sort of immersive, more richer experiences, like video, like co-browse, things that allow an agent or a user or an employee of any kind to sort of we have one that uses it in car dealership, does this sort of the video tour, but then you're not talking to a customer service person. You're talking to a salesperson who used to do this in person, right, before the pandemic. So um, it's really about extending those channels, connecting those channels, making sure you're always mobile. That's a very, very critical point. And then like I said, making sure that you have a seamless transition between the channels, so the customer feels like they don't start over every time they switch a channel.
Excellent. Yeah. So let's get into that way of minimizing the repetition, because you've brought it up a few times. It's very important. And I know that, this integration between channels remains, an ongoing discussion point, an ongoing challenge for a lot of retailers, even though we're hearing so much about contextual engagement, contextual service, the role of personalization. I mean, what's holding retailers back, really, and what is required, I guess, from a system standpoint, from a data standpoint, to create this now table stakes continuity across these service channels, right? Because I think, judging by your responses, it goes beyond just being able to, you know, escalate to a higher service channel or a more immersive service channel if you're starting from chat, right? It's the information that they're inputting. So if they do hop to a different channel, they don't have to start from scratch, right? And I'm sure that requires some work on the retailer side. So what needs to be done there?
Yeah, I mean, to be blunt, it's easier in most cases if you're new and you're starting fresh than if you've been entrenched and you have a lot of systems in place. That's usually the issue. To be frank with the data, there's a lot of silos, and there's a lot of sort of legacy systems. But if you peel that back another layer, what we're really looking at is organizational silos. It's basically who owns the full customer experience, and you can get sort of philosophical about it, like whether marketing owns it, or does the actual customer success team own it, or is there, there's more and more often we notice in sort of these more progressive companies who are trying to use digital as really a disruptor in the way they offer their service. We see titles like digital strategist or digital who owns it sort of across the board. And so I think that's the fundamental issue for a lot of retailers is these things were built in silos. It's the same reason when you go into a store, you have a very different conversation than when you call the customer service person who sometimes doesn't feel like a real employee of the same brand. It's the same exact reason. It's just happening on newer channels. And so what we're finding is this is a really exciting time because companies are leveraging digital engagement to really separate themselves. It's really being used as a differentiator. And those companies that get it, that will sort of have a strategist, a more sort of horizontal view, will be able to move much faster. It's not hard to think of how to do it. It's hard for companies to implement and commit to it if they've got systems in place and organizations in place who look at it differently. One looks at it very much from a cost perspective. One looks at it much more from a revenue perspective. And then you have this sort of dual ownership with sort of very, very mediocre results in the end from a customer experience perspective.
Got it. Yeah, so is it safe to say then that it's important for there to be a cultural alignment or conversation around how service and experience is, perceived in the organization, measured, what the philosophies are before you get into the nitty gritty of like the tools and the tech, because I know most folks watching this right now, they have systems in place, right? Like there's already work that's been done. So there's not that pie in the sky of starting from scratch all the time. So if that's the case, I mean, is it important to have that internal cultural conversation before anything else?
For sure, for sure. And that's the kind of conversation we get into with our customers essentially is like, it's not really about what you want the tech to do. It's about what you want your customer experience to be. And if you look at it from all different perspectives, which includes the folks in your organization who work in other departments, do all those things line up? Usually that's where our conversation goes there's really a nice blending of, like I said, online, app, and in store. There has to be a broader conversation, that include a lot of different people, and ideally you have buy-in across the leadership team who represent those different departments. Um, you know, so I totally agree that buy-in has to happen. But then, that buy-in really kind of comes to fruition when these use cases are made so evident. And I think one of the unique things that happened because of the pandemic is, there wasn't this sort of singularity. It was so broad and so like cut across every demographic and every sort of use case that people are basically now learning from how I think they learned in, just 1 year, maybe, I don't know the exact number, but maybe like 10 years of consumer behavior around technology. We saw QR codes come back. That was amazing.
I know.
They've been like
Finally.
that's an example of like that's not new technology, but it's the application, right? It's like
Hmm.
some people got on board and then they realized, oh, it works really well for this thing. Okay, so it's really like you said, it's getting that buy-in, that broader conversation, so that experience is actually it comes to fruition the way we have it in mind. When we talk about sort of the ideal state.
Yep. You heard it here. QR codes, the hidden hero of the pandemic. No, this is great. I'm glad we talked about like the broader strategy and, the cultural vision, because I do think that it has an impact on anything around innovation and customer experience. But before we go, Mayur, I do want to get a little granular. We did see the emergence of a lot of, cool tech and use cases emerging, across the entire retail landscape. For Acquirers World specifically, I mean, are there any emerging tech trends, that you guys are tracking? Any new channels that you think are being more widely adopted? I know you spoke about social messaging a little bit. Is that the area to watch, or is there anything else that you would want to call out for the folks watching that are trying to think a few steps ahead of the competition in terms of their CX?
Yeah, we're actually what we're seeing is a lot more video than anyone expected, and I think it's been pushed forward at past the point where it had to prove itself. It was sitting in this position where it sort of had to prove itself. Again, going back to your first question, not really a customer service contact center tool kind of thing. It didn't really belong there, but it's been around for years as a technology that didn't really have a use case in that traditional system. But what we really saw, what retailers should really take away is consumers are really good and actually better in most cases with sort of wanting a rich, personalized experience doing video. I mean, we're now very used to, accustomed to having this kind of conversation. So I think that's one big one. I'd say messaging is another big one. You brought it up. I think social messaging is part of it, but also sort of blurring the lines between, you put it so succinctly in those two pillars, that sort of automation self-service and then like deeper, more personalized, immersive sort of service. And, asynchronous conversations that happen over text or social messaging where you don't expect someone to respond right away, but you want that there so you can look at it later or you can respond to it later. That's another huge channel, and I think that's kind of blur the lines between how people see social messaging and text, and they kind of get blurred into the same thing. And I think that gives retailers a really big open door to sort of uh, get more involved in that part of that sort of that latent or asynchronous conversation that a customer always wants to have. Like for example, I always want certain things. I just want to know that I got it. Like I just want to be notified or it happened. Messaging is perfect for that. That's a great example of where I think another channel that will continue to to increase because of the way consumers I think have the what their preferences are. So those are a couple examples in terms of what we see coming. I think, like I said, video is really been eye-opening, like the
Yeah.
impact it will have, and it's not really deployed uh, that much out there. So I think we're going to see much more of that.
Very exciting, Mayur. So we'll definitely have to keep a close eye on those trends. I know I've been seeing a huge uptick in SMS, and
Yeah.
another channel that I covered a decade ago. That was actually one of my first feature reports with Retail Touchpoints 10 years ago. So it's very interesting to see this full circle moment for that particular channel. But Mayur, again, really appreciate you taking the time out to talk shop with me. A lot of exciting trends. We dug into a few best practices and some strategic considerations for all the folks watching. So thank you again so much for taking the time out.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And to all of you watching, really appreciate you taking the time out for this Retail Think Tank conversation. If you've been to the Hub, you know that this is only scratching the surface of all of the great resources and insights we have for you. So we encourage you to keep searching around, keep digging into all of the great content and conversations we have. And if you have any feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line on Twitter at @OurTouchpoints or through LinkedIn at Retail Touchpoints. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you for the next one. Take care.